Hi guys! We know that Minerva McGonagall was a Gryffindor, Pomona Sprout was a Hufflepuff, Phileas Flitwick was a Ravenclaw, Snape and Slughorn were Slytherins, Trelawney was a Ravenclaw, Dumbledore was a Gryffindor, Professor Kettleburn was a Hufflepuff, Hagrid was in Gryffindor, and as for the Defence Against the Dark Arts teachers, Lupin was a Gryffindor, Quirrell and Lockhart were both Ravenclaws, and Umbridge was a Slytherin. But what about the other Hogwarts professors? Were they all just Ravenclaws because they valued knowledge so much? Let's find out. Let's start off with Professor Cuthbert Binns, the History of Magic teacher. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he'd fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Every single time that we see Professor Binns in the books, he is teaching and telling people all about the history of magic. So however boring his teaching might be, he obviously finds the subject matter really interesting and wants to devote his life to finding out and teaching people all about the history of magic. Ravenclaw. Alecto and Amicus Carrow, the Death Eaters who take over Hogwarts after Dumbledore dies, seem quite obvious. First of all, they're Death Eaters, and we know that most Death Eaters were recruited from Slytherin House. Secondly, they have the traditional Slytherin anti-Muggle and pure-blood values. Thirdly, they don't come off as particularly intelligent. Obviously, they don't have the kindness that Hufflepuff values. And you could probably make some kind of a point for Gryffindor. But remember the scene where Amicus finds out that his sister pressed the dark mark and basically throws a fit and wants to blame it all on the students. We can push it off on the kids, and we'll say they forced her to press the mark, and that's why he got a false alarm. He can punish them, a couple of kids more or less. What's the difference? Only the difference between truth and lies, courage and cowardice, said Professor McGonagall, who turned pale. A difference, in short, which you and your sister seem unable to appreciate. He's terrified, and even Professor McGonagall insinuates that he's a coward. Slytherin. Aurora Sinistra is more difficult because the astronomy teacher doesn't play a big part in the books and we don't really get to know her very well. I would argue that as she never joins in the fight against you-know-who, or even in resisting Umbridge, she's probably not a Gryffindor. Or a Slytherin, as she never really strives for money or power. We see her being friendly to a lot of the teachers and assigning a lot of homework. I think you must have misheard Professor Sinistra. Europa's covered in ice, not mice. So I would say that she's in one of those two, probably Ravenclaw. Also note that there are theories that say that Professor Sinistra didn't go to Hogwarts, but rather to the Wagado School in Africa, which is a wizarding school that specialises in astronomy. Professor Grubbly-Plank, the Care of Magical Creatures teacher who comes in to substitute for Hagrid, is quite an interesting case. Obviously she's very smart and knowledgeable. Hermione herself says that she didn't know half the things that Professor Grubbly-Plank taught them about unicorns, and we know that the Ravenclaws really value her lessons. So I feel like there's quite a strong case there for Ravenclaw. You could argue that Professor Grubbly-Plank, like Hagrid, deals with very dangerous creatures, so obviously she has to overcome her fear of them and must be quite brave. But I don't think that that's her dominant attribute. And she also doesn't seem to seek out dangerous creatures in the way that Hagrid did. She plans on teaching students about Sneasels and Gnarls and unicorns and creatures like that, rather than centering her lessons on hippogriffs and blast-ended scroots. And she doesn't willingly seek out as much danger as possible, which is why I think she's a Hufflepuff. We know that she's hardworking, And while she's often quite gruff with the students, you can find a lot of cases where she displays a lot of kindness and loyalty. For example, in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry brings Hedwig to her and she takes care of her and repairs her wing without even really asking any questions. Or in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Hagrid hides in his hut because he's scared of facing anyone after reading Skeeter's article, when Harry asks Professor Grubbly-Plank what happened, she just tells him to mind his own business. "What's wrong with Hagrid?" Harry said, hurrying to catch up with Professor Grubbly-Plank. "Never you mind," she said, as though she thought he was being nosy. "I do mind, though," said Harry hotly. "What's up with him?" Professor Grubbly-Plank acted as though she couldn't hear him and doesn't betray Hagrid's secrets or try to embarrass him, which I think shows a lot of loyalty and kindness. Hufflepuff. So obviously we don't know a lot about Professor Vector, the arithmancy teacher, but we know that she teaches what is probably the most difficult subject at Hogwarts, so I think for now we should just put her in Ravenclaw. While we do see a lot of Madame Hooch, the flying instructor, throughout the books, we don't really see her displaying any particular house traits. And we know she loves Quidditch a lot and she referees every single match. We know she yells at the players all the time for breaking the rules. We know that when Neville breaks his ankle, she's very kind to him and helps him go to the hospital wing. But overall, I think I'm going to go with Gryffindor, just because her main interest in life seems to be Quidditch, a game that is wildly dangerous and all about putting yourself in danger. You've got bludgers flying everywhere, you yourself are flying at very dangerous heights, so I think she would be in Gryffindor. We only see Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor, in one scene, which is at the beginning of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where You-Know-Who and the Death Eaters have captured her and eventually kill her. So it's very difficult to judge her true personality because the one scene that we saw her in wasn't really her natural state. At first glance, a lot of people would probably say that she's definitely not a Gryffindor because she's terrified. But again, who wouldn't be terrified in a situation like that, where they're hung up in a room full of Death Eaters and You-Know-Who? And I do think that she is quite brave because we know that she wrote a whole article in the Daily Prophet defending Muggles, even though she knew that that would probably get her hunted down. And she does have a lot of Ravenclaw attributes because we know that she's a teacher at Hogwarts, she's an academic, and she writes articles explaining why wizards can't just keep on marrying one another and upholding the pure blood ideology. But then she's also your typical Hufflepuff because she's very kind, caring, compassionate, and obviously hardworking. The one thing that we can be fairly certain about is that she's not a Slytherin because she completely goes against all of their ideals. So overall, I would say that her dominant traits are very Hufflepuff. Now let's assume that all of these guesses are true. I've added all of the results up and the answers are pretty surprising. It turns out that each house is pretty well represented when it comes to teachers. You've got 4 teachers from Hufflepuff, 5 each from Gryffindor and Slytherin, and 7 for Ravenclaw. So for Hufflepuff, you would have Professor Sprout and Professor Kettleburn, who are confirmed Hufflepuffs, and also most probably Professor Grubbly-Plank and Professor Charity Burbage. For Gryffindor, the confirmed teachers are Minerva McGonagall, Hagrid, Dumbledore and Lupin, and you've also probably got Madame Hooch in there. And then for Slytherin, you've definitely got Snape, Umbridge and Slughorn, and then you most probably also have Amicus and Alecto Carrow. And for Ravenclaw, we know we've got Professor Flitwick and Professor Trelawney, as well as Quirrell and Lockhart. And then you've probably also got Professor Binns, Professor Sinistra and Professor Vector. So I think this makes sense if you look at it, because it shows that each house can produce a fair amount of teachers. But obviously the most professors would come from Ravenclaw, because Ravenclaw is for those people who most value knowledge and learning, and it's exactly those kind of people who would probably go on to become Hogwarts professors. Also note that I have left out a couple of teachers. I left out the Study of Ancient Runes professor because we never find out anything about them. I left out Moody because it wasn't really Moody teaching, but rather Barty Crouch Jr. But then it wasn't Barty Crouch Jr. who got the job, it was Moody. So it kind of gets complicated, and we don't know the houses of either of them anyway, so it would have all been speculation. And I thought it would be easier to just leave that out. And obviously there were also a lot of past professors whom I haven't included. So looking at that, it probably seems silly to have included Professor Kettleburn, but I wanted to include him because he's one of the few people whose houses we actually know. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do leave me a comment telling me what you think. What houses do you think that all of the other Hogwarts teachers were in? Is there any house you'd agree or disagree with? Do tell me down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you can give it a like, and you can subscribe to my channel so you can see when I post a new video. I make Harry Potter videos every week. Again, thanks so much for watching. Bye!